So, am I just jumping right in? Okay. Guys, thank you for coming to the half century of hip hop panel. I think that because this is the hip hop panel, I need you to wave your hands in the air like you just don't care. Let's get into it. Yes, here we go. It's hip hop. All right. So I am so honored. Oh boy. Oh wait, I have a whole name thing. Okay. One moment, guys. Technical difficulties. Okay. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so grateful you guys are all here. And I'm so excited to get into this conversation with these incredible authors. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. I'm Drew Dixon. And before we begin, I want to let you know that the books by these amazing authors are available for sale at the Greenlight bookstore table in that direction. Be sure to cop one of each because they are incredible. So before I jump in, I am going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then let's get into it. I'm going to let you take it away, Jonathan.
Hey everybody, my name is Jonathan Abrams. Last year I wrote The Come Up, an oral history on the rise of hip hop, where I talked to about 300, thank you. I talked about 300 DJ, artists, producers about the rise and the evolution and the expansion. So it's hip hop in their own words. My day job, I'm a staff writer at the New York Times. I just got switched over to our culture desk. So that's me.
All right, Dan, what's up?
Hello, Dan Charnas. I'm the author of a book called The Big Payback, The History of the Business of Hip Hop. And my latest book is Dilla Time, The Life and Afterlife of J. Dilla, the hip-hop producer who reinvented rhythm. And my day job, I'm an associate arts professor about 2 blocks away at New York University's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Powell. I'm here. I'm tired. I was running to get here. I want to thank Drew and Jonathan and Dan for having me. I'm glad to be a part of this. That's all I got to say.
And this is the book. Right here.
Thank you.
The Kevin Powell Reader. Okay, guys, let's get into it. So I had to flip the script just a little bit and remix my questions because of breaking news that we all sort of, I'm guessing, are aware of that happened on Friday. And, so I'm talking about the arrest of someone after 26 years in the otherwise cold case in the murder of Tupac Shakur. And my question isn't so much about that. I know you wrote about that Friday in the New York Times. I read that piece. My question is really, 50 years into this art form, how did this become a breaking news story on CNN? I remember the day Biggie died. I got a call from friends in LA. And I remember watching the coverage actually with like Kim and some people from Junior Mafia over in Bed-Stuy, and we couldn't find any coverage. Like even on MTV, it took 20 minutes for Kurt Loder to like maybe talk about it for 20 seconds, and then that was it. This is Biggie Smalls' murder, MTV, BET was just back-to-back videos taped, and now it's a CNN, MSNBC, breaking news, New York Times story. How did we get here? Like, what is the significance of this arc? How did hip-hop take it this far? I'm gonna let you go.
So I was one of those kids who I grew up in Southern California in the mid-90s, and I'll never forget where I was when I heard that Pac died. And I think I heard about it from a friend. It wasn't a pop-up or a notification on my phone or anything. I think we're here because, one, news has obviously changed. Back in the day, the New York Times would be writing a story that would be on deadline for the next day's paper. We wouldn't be thinking about trying to get a story up in minutes or hours on news that just broke or just happened. Everything is immediate. And I think simultaneously, hip hop has obviously penetrated the mainstream, so much so since Tupac's death, it's embedded in pop culture. So you have those two things happening, and it's a breaking story. You get alerts on your phone. It's immediate.
Right. Dan, as somebody who wrote for The Source magazine back when I met you 30 years ago, from The Source to CNN, how do we make that jump?
Through the work of the man to my left, Kevin Powell, right? one of the things I write about in The Big Payback is, Quincy Jones wanted to start this hip-hop magazine under the auspices of Time Warner, which was then the largest media company in the world. And it grew in fits and starts, but there were two really important stories, I think, in that first issue, right, that sort of set the table for what media coverage was going to be. One of them was Scott Polson Bryant's story on Puff, and the other was Kevin Powell's insistence, I believe, in writing about this former dancer for Digital Underground who was going to be really, really important. And I think it was a very prescient moment in journalism because it really launched the media career of Tupac. I mean, he already had records, but he wasn't a figure. And so I actually think Kevin should talk about that.
And Kevin, I just want to, for everyone who doesn't know, Kevin has interviewed Tupac maybe more than anyone. He did the first interview after Tupac was shot in 1994, jail, like an interview at Rikers, like the first journalist Tupac spoke to. And he was in Vegas when Tupac was killed and was there when he was, unfortunately, declared dead in the hospital. So he is the person. I would be remiss not to throw to Kevin for this conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to repeat what Mopreme Shakur, Tupac's brother, said the other day on CNN. This is very traumatic for us who actually knew Tupac and actually were connected to him in some ways. There's a lot I want to say. One, I have to say that I have been a professional journalist for 37 years, since I was a youth. And so I take journalism very seriously. And, when Jonathan laid it out very eloquently, and thank you, Dan, for your kindness, but we have to be honest, if we work in media, since back in the day, as we say, journalism has become very sensationalistic. Why is this news on CNN or other places that there's someone that was arrested for the murder of Tupac Shakur 27 years later? Why did it take 27 years, first and foremost? Because black life is not valued. Black life is not valued at all. This is someone who's been on the media all this time talking about this. He's on Art of Dialogue. He's on Vlad TV. He even has a book on Amazon talking about what happened. I'm saying to you all, first of all, and I'm saying this as a journalist, as a professional journalist, our media in America has become very sensationalistic, and black death sells. Black death sells. And we don't really care about black people or people of color or any marginalized group, queer folks, women, disabled folks. What we care about, will this get some eyeballs to my website? That's what we care about. Do y'all feel me out there? It's important to say that. Dan is right. I did the first cover story, and I need to say this too. Enough of these divisions in hip-hop that I've seen this year. I actually wrote for The Source and Vibe magazine. I wrote for The Source first, then I wrote for Vibe magazine, and I've written for other hip-hop magazines. I've seen so much division around East Coast, West Coast. My wife's from the West Coast. I love all coasts. We don't own any of these coasts. We need to stop all this ridiculousness. And I'm saying to y'all, when I think about what this report, until we actually get to the level of what really happened on September 7th, 1996, it wasn't just one person, just like we keep. The way I think about this, y'all, we still, 60 years ago this November, we're still talking about, well, who really killed John F. Kennedy? Y'all feel what I'm saying? Who really killed Bobby Kennedy? Who really killed Malcolm X? Who really killed Dr. King? Who really killed Tupac? Who really killed Biggie? This keeps going. How did Marilyn Monroe really die? This is intentional. And I'm saying to those of us who actually work in the media, whether it's mainstream media or independent media, be critical thinkers and ask yourself some simple questions. Why is this just coming up now? Why is this convenient? And if this person's been out there all along, all of a sudden they discovered this person when they've been sitting there in Nevada, there's something much deeper going on here. My next book, my 17th book, is about Tupac Shakur. I'm not going to say a lot here about Tupac, but I can guarantee you it will be in the book. And a shout out to Johnny Temple and Akashic Books, because that's who's publishing this book next year.
Okay, well, speaking of your next book, I want to just pivot back to your books, the ones right here that I've read that are really incredible.
Thank you.
And I'd like to know, I'm going to start with you, Dan, on this one. What inspired your choice of subject? Dilla, phenomenal producer, and just your excavation of who he is and his impact is so brilliantly done. How did that speak to you and become the thing you decided to devote your time and 500 pages to, 400 plus?
Oh my God. Well, it's a long story. I'll try to keep it really, really short. Back in the 90s, I worked for Rick Rubin at his company, American Recordings, and I had an artist named Chino Excel who had done kind of well, and so we finally had a budget to work with any producer we wanted to work with. I said, yo, we got to go. There's this kid in Detroit named JD. He works with Tribe Called Quest. So my very first trip to Detroit was in 1999, to go work with JD, and we drive out to the basement in Conant Gardens, and we walk downstairs, and there's Common Sense. I'm like, what's Common Sense doing here? Because he was still Common Sense to us, right? And we spent the weekend together, and we worked on a couple tracks, and that was it, right? That's the sum total of my interaction with JD.
Right.
It wasn't until after I got back to LA to work to mix the album that I started really understanding that I was with Coltrane the whole time. And then cut to me teaching at NYU. I have 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-old kids who love Dilla, even though he's been gone for like 10 years, 11 years. Why is that? So Jason King, who was my mentor and the chair of the Institute, he said, why don't you teach a course on Dilla? And so that course led to a field trip where I took all the students to Detroit. I had since married into a family in Detroit, right? So that's a whole other story. But there wasn't anything musically accurate for my students to read. And so just as you probably know as authors, you kind of get dragged into a book project. Like, I guess I gotta write this. And it was, I pitched it as a little science book about music, and somehow it became 400 pages of a biography. So,
Hold up that little science book.
Yeah.
So dope. I cannot
That
say.
little book.
Just
Wow.
truly incredible. I'm going to go to you from this one, Jonathan, because one thing that has been really fun for me in rereading Dilla Time and then in reading The Come Up, and in your case, Kevin, also rereading a lot of the pieces that you wrote that I read in real time, but also reading the poems and putting it all together, is how they kind of play off of each other. So like reading about like Marley Marl and like, Shockley and the stuff that you talk about in The Come Up. So interesting hearing the way all of these people came together to create what we now know and take for granted as hip hop. How did it speak to you and come alive and become a book that you needed to write?
Yeah, so I knew that we were coming up on 50 years pretty soon. I think I started working on this book back in 2018, 2019. And I knew that there were a lot of the bricklayers, the pioneers, the originators. They're still among us.
That's right.
And if you look at other musical genres, that's not necessarily so, just because hip hop is obviously so young. And I hadn't heard a lot of stuff in their own words, and I wanted to try to document that and chart that while I could. So yes, I wanted to talk to Ice Cube and Ice-T and the big names, but it was really important for me to be able to talk to somebody like MC Sha Rock, who's one of the first female MCs, or Duke Booty, who helped write The Message and really push that to go forward. Such a groundbreaking song before he passed away. That meant a lot to me. And a couple other people talked to me and ended up passing away before the book was published. And that was one of the big goals for me, was to be able to get their words and their thoughts and have it, down for history.
It's incredible. I mean, it's amazing the way you kind of talk to these individual pioneers of different sort of pieces of it, even like the blackout, how people got equipment from the blackout, and how the seeds sort of, spread in the wind, and then they're in LA, and then they're in Atlanta. Just really can't recommend it enough. Kevin, your book is really a body of work that covers your 37 years in journalism. So I guess I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. What led you to write about hip hop in the first place, and how does it feel 37 years later to still be in the game? Like, what is that like for you?
I mean, first I'm kicking myself because I got Dan and Jonathan's books and I forgot to bring it to get it signed, so I got to chase them down now.
You'll see us again.
These books are important, and I'm so excited listening. I could just be out there listening, to be honest with y'all. I did not want to write about hip hop in the beginning. I wanted to be an investigative reporter like Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post exposing Watergate. I was very clear about that. I wanted to write essays. Even when I moved to New York from Jersey, where I'm originally from, I wrote poetry. I was going to write plays. Harry Allen, who I have to acknowledge, Harry Allen. If you remember Public Enemy's record, Don't Believe the Hype, Chuck D references Harry Allen, who's widely considered one of our first hip-hop journalists, the father of hip-hop journalism, before The Source, before Vibe, before anything. And I think anyone who talks about hip-hop history that leaves out Harry Allen doesn't really know fully hip-hop history. So Harry Allen, Lisa Jones, Lisa Kennedy, Carol Cooper, Greg Tate. These are all the folks that I read at the Village Voice, at the City Sun, people who were writing for LA Weekly, out on the West Coast, San Francisco Weekly. My first editor of a music piece was actually Danielle Smith, who was the editor-in-chief at the San Francisco Weekly back in the day. And so Harry Allen asked me, did I write about hip-hop? And I lied and said yes, because I needed a check. That's how it started.
Wow.
Why lie to y'all? That's how it started.
Which is like the most hip-hop thing ever.
I was freelance writing. I was actually teaching in a Saturday program at NYU for high school kids. I was working as an assistant at the New School. I was writing for the Amsterdam News. Shout out to black newspapers. Shout out black media. Shout out black media. And my first hip-hop piece was on Intelligent Hoodlum out of Queens, Tragedy.
Wow.
You know, I eventually wrote for Thrasher, Skateboard Magazine, LA Weekly, San Francisco Weekly, Rolling Stone, which is a whole other conversation, given the comment to Jan Winter a couple days back. But what I did have in my back pocket was that I was a lifelong hip-hop head. I grew up popping, locking, breakdancing. My nickname when I was a kid was Keepo1, but that was my tag as a graffiti writer. I was in the early clubs like Latin Quarters, Rooftop. I just told Dougie Fresh the other day, the first hip-hop show I ever saw was him and Slick Rick at the Funhouse, when Dougie Fresh had the Jerry Curl afro and Slick Rick was still MC Ricky D. So I literally was in this culture, and I went to college with Sister Soldier, who by the time we get to the late 80s, early 90s, had connected with Ice Cube and Public Enemy and KRS-One and Light and all these folks. So I was all around it. And anyone out there old enough to remember, we used to do concerts on 125th Street in Harlem. We were the ones organizing those concerts of hip-hop concerts up in Harlem. So I was behind the scenes. I had no interest whatsoever in being out there in any way, and I definitely wasn't planning on being a hip-hop writer. But once I decided to do it, I knew I had to go back and read Rolling Stone, read Amiri Baraka's Blues People, read everything I could about music and culture, because I think if you're serious about writing about music, culture, art in general, you got to read the people that came before you.
Sure.
So I took that very seriously. So when people give me credit, don't give me credit. Say Greg Tate, say Harry Allen, say Lisa Jones, say Carol Cooper. Acknowledge the folks who came. Like, we should read the people who they read. That's important to say to folks. It ain't just me. We come out of a tradition, and I was clear that I came out of a tradition.
Yes, well, for sure, no doubt. And now I have another question about the interviews that you guys did. So in each of your books, like it's in some cases it's explicitly, these are interviews, it's an oral history. In Kevin's case, there are interviews with bell hooks, Tupac, others, right? It's clearly interviews. Dan, I think the interviews in your case, they're more kind of opaque, you know, but they're clearly, you can feel where you are speaking to Questlove or, you know, someone in JD's family or whatever. Is there a particular interview captured in your book, each of you I'm going to ask, that surprised you, that stays with you, that you just kind of carry, that maybe even changed you? Of your interviews, Jonathan, what would you say?
Yeah, mine was talking to Kool Mo D for my book. There's
Kool Mo D.
So it's funny because I remember the day that I called him, I had set up the interview time, and I don't know if he forgot about it or not, but he answered like real gruffly, like, what? Like he was like he was just pissed off. And in my head, I'm like, this isn't gonna be a good interview. And then very, very quickly he warmed up. And Kool Mo D is one of those artists who was there at the beginning when hip hop was just coming up. He was there when it started rising, and he was there when it started to punctuate mainstream, when artists decided to boycott the Grammys, but he was one who noticeably decided to attend. And he just had a full 360 all the way perspective on hip hop, where it had been, where it had come from. And there's just certain moments, like when, I don't know if you guys get this, just when you're doing an interview, you're just like, this isn't just an interview, you're talking to one of the smartest people you've ever spoken to in your life.
Yeah.
And you know, he just real quick, because he said a lot of jewels that I'm going to take with me for a long time, but just him talking about Public Enemy and NWA at a time where we're almost at the same level of popularity, and then it seemed like there was a sudden shift for the powers that be to get behind NWA and kind of leave behind Public Enemy, and that really, really altered and affected hip-hop going forward. So he just had just loads and loads of those.
Wow. Dan, what about you?
Two quick stories. One from the middle of the reporting and one from the very end. So the middle was, nobody had ever really dug into Dilla's personal life, his romantic life. And when his ex-fiancée finally agreed to talk, after basically, you know, saying she didn't want to, it was a 6-hour conversation at the end of which we were both in tears. Like, it was transformed the book so that I could get a picture more of the inner life of this man. And the other one was from the end of the book. You might know this story, Drew. And my mother-in-law in Detroit is still angry with me about this because last summer, we always go to Detroit for the summer, and she says, I was so mad at you last summer. You got up from in the middle of dinner to take a phone call. I said, you've been in this family for 10 years. Don't you know in a black family, you don't get up in the middle of the dinner table? Like, you've been here for... And I said, but Tony, it was D'Angelo calling. And you know what she said? Who's D'Angelo?
Wow.
But that 2-hour conversation with D'Angelo ended up being worth the drama after, because we just talked about James for 2 hours straight. And it was another tearful conversation. He was extremely generous, and again, it added a dimension to the book that would not have been there had he not spoken.
I'm so glad to hear it.
Yes.
Wow.
What about you, Kevin?
You know, I'm actually going to bring it back to Tupac, and it's not one person. You know, I think it's important for us to understand, you know, and Jonathan, you laid it out. I have a piece in Politico right now y'all should check out. It's about hip-hop at 50, and I talk about how it shifted. No one, I need to make it clear, we're not anti-democracy. We want to hear all voices. What I'm anti as a lifelong hip-hop head is the lack of balance and diversity that now exists in hip-hop. You know, and I think that when I think about this Tupac book that I'm working on, remember, y'all, Tupac got killed in September 96. Only 6 months later, Biggie got killed. Back then, it was like, yo. Since then, we've lost over 100 rappers to senseless violence, and most of the cases have not been solved. It's not just Tupac and Biggie, y'all, that we're talking about. And so I say that to say, I was asked to write a book about Tupac almost immediately after he was killed. I couldn't do it because I was deeply traumatized. Also, I was very clear, I did not want to be someone who was pimping this legacy just because I had an attachment to the legacy. Does that make sense, y'all? And there was no way we could have predicted back then that he would become the most famous rapper in the world. He is. My wife and I just honeymooned in Africa, literally, and guess what, y'all? Tupac t-shirts are everywhere, literally. I say that to say, once I decided over the last 10, 15 years to do the book, I've had book deals. I've walked away from book deals. Thank God for Johnny Temple and Akashic Books again. That's who I'm doing the book with. I said I need to be somewhere where I feel safe as a writer, and I could do it the way I know how to do it. And I've interviewed over 150 to 200 people for this Tupac book. There's not a single interview that is more important. I literally have cried through most of the interviews because people who don't normally talk about Tupac, and I'm talking about New York, Baltimore, where his mother is from, Bay Area, LA, Atlanta, and Vegas, have talked with me. It's an honor and humbling to have folks open up like that, but I take that very seriously because what I realized too, when I interviewed Tupac back in the 90s, I hadn't yet fully absorbed the work of people like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and Nikki Giovanni and Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, in addition to all the men writers I had studied. Does that make sense, y'all?
Absolutely.
And so that's what's coming to the Tupac book. And it's not just a book about Pac, it's actually a book about all of you out there over the last 50, 60 years in America, if that makes sense. So it's not one person. It's been an emotional roller coaster every single interview that I've done because random people will pop up and say, oh, this was my connection to Tupac, and I don't talk to anyone else, but I'm going to talk to you. And it's profound, and it's spiritual, and I don't take that for granted because writing is really spiritual to me. It's not just about a dollar. It's not about being famous. It's like my work is for the people. My work is for the people. And so everyone is important. No one's more important than anyone else. All of it's important to me. And the most important interviews are actually the non-famous people, honestly. Yep.
There is a spiritual energy in all three of these books. I really want to say that as someone who's been carrying them around for the last month and revisiting pieces of them, yours reading for the first time, hearing the names and voices of people I know personally. I wasn't sure how it would feel, if it would be eye-opening. It is, you feel the souls and the spirits in all three of these books in different ways. There's love,
Thank you.
And it's profound. But I'm going to go to something that I would be remiss not to bring up here. You talked about Bell Hooks, you talked about Audre Lorde, you talked about some of the women you've interviewed and your evolution, Kevin, and this is for all three of you guys. 50 years into this hip-hop art form that I think all four of us on the stage love deeply. Yeah. I can certainly say I do, and I believe all of us do.
Yeah.
What are we gonna do? I say this as, I'm a former A&R person at Def Jam, Arista Records, helped to make a number of iconic rap records. I'm also a silence breaker. I was raped by Russell Simmons when I worked at Def Jam when I was
Yes.
24 years old. Quit my job, was going to leave the industry, was going to get a PhD, but I'd missed all the deadlines in the middle of my nervous breakdown. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Went to Arista, made more records for Clive Davis, brought in a lot of my friends like Lauren and Clef and Tip to make records in the big building and to go mainstream, and that's how I try to use my access and opportunity. But what are we going to do in the next 50 years, and even in this moment as we reflect on the first 50 years, about the pain and the harm that has been caused by some of these people we admire? How do we make sense of the legacy of a Russell Simmons or an Africa Bambaataa, right? What, Dr. Dre, what about the women? What about, in the case of Africa Bambaataa, the young men? What do we do about the harm that hip-hop has caused? Not to blame hip-hop, rock and roll, American culture in general, lots of harm, lots of issues. But we're talking about hip-hop today. So what do we do? Where do we put it? How do we process that? I don't know who wants to go first. Kevin.
First of all, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. No, please. Because this country was not just founded on racism and classism, it was also founded on sexism. We need to be very clear about that. And you're right, any popular culture that we create at any given time, it could be rock and roll, it could be jazz, it could be hip hop, is a reflection of the larger society. And when we talk about hip hop, you know, I want to speak quickly as a black person, but then in a general sense, as a black man. I mean, think about it, y'all. Coming out of the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, to your point, Drew, there's a whole body of work created by black women with names like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Nikki Giovanni, Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, so many different sisters. And yes, there's black male writers that I admire from that period, but literally zero of them, and I'm saying this now as an author of 16 books myself, zero of them did the same thing that the sisters were doing coming into the 70s and 80s, which is, let's redefine black womanhood. We don't redefine black manhood. Many of us, what we've done, we regurgitate what we've been taught, which is patriarchy, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, toxic masculinity. That's just a fact. That's a fact. That's a fact. Now, am I a hip-hop head? Am I a sports fan? Am I a video game fan? Am I a boy who grew up in a certain kind of way? Absolutely. But what I began to realize, even in the 90s when Tupac got in trouble, Tupac at least said that I didn't do that, what he was accused of in that hotel room, but what he said he was guilty of is not stopping the other guys from doing it. Why did he even have the awareness to say that? Because his mother was a Afeni Shakur, y'all. And if we really look at Stanley Nelson's documentary on the Black Panther Party would not have existed without the power and leadership of black women doing all the work. The black men got the credit for it, but the sisters did the work. Are y'all with me out there? And so to your point, Drew, hip-hop is just in that context.
Right.
I love hip-hop. I'm a hip-hop head for life. You know what I'm saying? But there is something wrong when we as men of color are aping the value system of white men in power. There's something wrong with that. You know, not all white men, but white men who actually believe that the way to be in control as a man is to dominate everyone else. And many of us have done the same thing. And so that's where we get a Russell Simmons from, who I wrote about. It's an essay about him in that collected writings. It's where we have all this traumatic stuff that's been going on in our communities. And then to Jonathan's point, someone, record labels, media, video channels, decided we're not going to have balance and diversity. Because think about it, y'all. Back in the day, and Drew, you remember this. Dan, you remember this. We were grown-ups then. De La Soul had a record called Millie Pull a Gun on Santa Claus.
Right, I loved it.
Where De La Soul was actually talking about gender violence, violence against women and girls. But that doesn't even exist anymore. You can't get a song like Tupac's Keep Your Head Up anymore.
Right. Because
everything is about sexism, sexism, sexism. And it's destructive to all of us. And did hip-hop create sexism? Absolutely not. Did hip-hop create any of these isms and phobia? Absolutely not. But it can reflect everything that's going on and perpetuate it if you don't know any better. Are y'all with me out there?
For sure.
And that's where we are, unfortunately. And the tragedy is that we're celebrating hip-hop at 50. When I went to Rock the Bells, as I talk about in my political piece, we don't even realize it as we're doing shows where we might include MC Sha Ra, because we do, but she's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. and MC Light is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. These are MC Shyrock is the first female rapper, period, that was recorded, period. Only Queen Latifah was put on in prime time as if she's the only one worthy as a woman of being in the same space as the men. And to her credit, she brought all those sisters back who were on earlier when there was no one there at Rock the Bells. And so until we have honest conversations as men in hip hop, writers, journalists, executives, people on radio stations, podcasts, etc., and we're willing to listen to the voices of women and girls, nothing's gonna change. And just on a simple level, as a black man, how dare I define my definition of manhood based on the oppression of other people because they're women, because they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-gender conforming, disabled, any of those things? How can I say I hate oppression, then turn around and become an oppressor myself through my art form and my writings?
Say it. Dan, Jonathan, I also want to let you guys know I wanted to get at least one question in if I can, if anybody wants to come over to the microphone. But Dan, John, anything to add on that?
I mean, I agree with everything that Kevin just said. I don't have too much to add, except just thinking, as Kevin was speaking, about the patience of our colleagues like Dream Hampton and
Yes.
Joan Morgan and Kierna Mayo, who loved hip-hop through, you know, those early years, late 80s, early 90s, even while a lot of this stuff were going on. And you know, as the male writers, our attention wasn't on it like theirs were. So they led,
Yeah.
right? And I think that needs to be said. And then it's just about, as a history teacher, it's about reshuffling the canon, right? It's about making sure that we know that what Sylvia Robinson did on
That's
a real
right.
level, not just, some woman who came in and
That's
did this
right.
fake record. Like, no, she actually set the aesthetic template for this whole thing
Right.
in like 3 different ways. So yeah, it is about canon, and it's about, you know, in Dilla Time I had to reckon with misogyny and violence in that
Right.
book, and you have to deal with it. You have
Yeah.
to sit in it.
Yep. Jonathan?
Yeah, I took a long time to come up with the title of my book, and I ended up calling it The Come Up because, to me, the story of hip hop rose from kids having nothing, who were valued or unvalued and did not have anything to do. Hip hop rose from oppression. And for that oppression to be able to manifest itself in misogyny, in violence towards women and other stuff, that just really, to be able to hold down others when you've come from oppression, is what I'm saying, that hip hop shouldn't stand for that, and it's time for it to be reckoned with. I think about some of the songs that I listened to when I was growing up, that I used to have in my headphones back in the day when my mom said, don't have that hoppity hip in our house. And some of that, she was right. Some of that shit I shouldn't have been listening to. Because back then, not knowing any better and having to learn stuff on my own, I can see how that was damaging and how that could affect and be harmful for young kids. And the names that you mentioned, people like Russell Simmons and Africa Bambaataa and Dr. Dre, there needs to be some type of really, really reckoning for all of us as consumers, as journalists, as people who love hip hop and have devoted a large part of their lives to hip hop, for that type of activity and that action not to happen anymore, because it's damaging.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that personally. Do we have any questions? Because if not, I haven't. Okay, did you want to come down with your question? Okay. I don't think we can hear you.
We're filming.
Thank you. And by the way, I think you are potentially going to be filmed, so, full disclosure.
Hi. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Drew, but as folks who, you're talking about 50 years of hip hop, you've grown up with hip hop in addition to working in it professionally. What do you cherish most about being able to work in this music that has clearly meant so much to all of you?
Wow.
That's
Wow.
a great question.
I'm just going to go really quick and then get out of the way. It's just the splitting of the atom. I mean, I just feel like I was present for the splitting of atom after atom after atom. Being in the studio with Lauren for the making of The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, I was there for almost every session. Putting Lauren with Aretha Franklin, putting Wyclef with Whitney Houston for My Love Is Your Love, Wyclef with Carlos Santana for Maria Maria, putting Kanye in the studio with Estelle for American Boy, hearing the interlude that became You're All I Need to Get By. Just the fact that to be in a space where atom after atom, just big bang after big bang after big bang was happening. I introduced Eazy-E to Run DMC because I needed him to clear Bone Thugs and Harmony for the show's soundtrack, and then he died a week later of AIDS. I had no idea he was dying.
Wow.
I mean, just the levels of like groundbreaking seismic shifting that I got to be a part of, contribute to, and witness is something I can't even describe and is an honor.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Sure.
I'm gonna get my.
Okay, well, I love that question because we're in it for the love as well. We wouldn't be in it if we didn't love it. And I recently wrote this piece for the New York Times about, for all these 50th anniversary retrospectives, we weren't really talking about the music itself. And specifically this incredible canon and database of breakbeat records that we all sort of knew and were the building blocks of the culture. And there's this one moment, this is when New York had stopped letting, like they'd shut down all like the hip hop venues, like there was no more Union Square, there was no more Latin Quarter. And so we had these little roving clubs like The Building or Amanda Shear had Car Wash at Quando's on the Lower East Side. So there was this group that didn't even have, they had one single out, but their album wasn't out yet. They were called Tribe Called Quest. Perhaps you've heard of them. So they all came out in hoodies, right? These hoodies over their head, and the stage was dark. And this is like a ratty venue. I don't know if you remember it, Kev, but like ratty venue on the Lower East Side. But it was packed with like industry people, the kids, you know.
Right.
We remember the beads that Jamal used to grow, wearing like little beads and stuff, and cloth backpacks. And they came out to this song called UFO by ESG. Does anybody know that song? You might not know the name of it, but you know the sound because it's been sampled in a million trillion hip hop songs.
Right.
So we didn't know their music yet, but they came out to this break record, and everybody screamed for them because it was a moment of recognition. Like, and I teach young people, and they will never know the feeling of sharing that kind of moment with other people at the dawn of something.
Yeah.
So when I think about love, when I think about like what I remember, that's what I remember, that feeling of being in that room.
Yeah.
Wow. Jonathan, do you want to?
Yeah, I can go. So with Drew, Dan, and Kevin, you know, they've really worked in hip hop and experienced hip hop, and you know, I'm a person who grew up idolizing Tupac, while Kevin is a person who actually knew Tupac. So it's a little bit different perspective for me. I just know that growing up, hip hop was something that showed me all the spans of humanity for Black people. A lot of times when you're consuming mainstream media, if you're watching a movie or a TV show, there may be the black criminal on TV, or if it's not the black criminal, it'll be the one big Bill Cosby outstanding character. And for me, you know, somebody like Tupac showed all the ranges of humanity, that a black person could be smart, poetic, angry, mad, all these ranges of emotions. And there's so many artists. Like I love where I grew up and when I grew up in the mid-90s, because to me, hip hop was, you know, I'm gonna sound old obviously, but it was at its peak for me, where you had so many artists coming out in so many different ranges, and you know, Afrocentricism and just so much creativity, and that was something that I feel is hard pressed to match these days.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kevin?
This is a beautiful panel. I just need to say that. I'm just really, because it's honest. You know what I'm saying? And it's you know, I want to piggyback on you for a second, Jonathan, and you, Brother Dan, all of you. Hip hop is the result of the failures of the civil rights movement. If we really understand Dr. King, at the end of his life, he's in Memphis, Tennessee, working with working class black men who were wearing signs saying, "I'm a man." They were fighting for union justice, just like the writers and the actors have been doing for the last couple months, car workers, UPS workers, you know what I'm talking about. Dr. King also was trying to organize a poor people's campaign. He was saying, what does it matter that you can sit anywhere on the bus if you have no money to get on the bus? What does it matter you can sit at a lunch counter if you have no money to buy a hamburger? The same poor people that Dr. King was telling us not to abandon are the poor people who created hip-hop. In New York, it was African-Americans, West Indians. Shout out to Boricuas, Puerto Ricans, Latinx folks. Never leave out Latinx folks. The West Coast, we know there was a parallel energy, especially as you were interviewing, I'm sure, some of the pioneers on the West Coast, Jonathan, Chicano community, the Black American community. And so what is it? The joy of it to me is that hip-hop, a simple definition, is making something out of nothing, winning on your own terms. Making something out of nothing, winning your own terms. I mean, think about it, y'all. We're talking about a global phenomenon of the last 50 years. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that came about because of a microphone, turntables, vinyl records, some cardboard, linoleum, or even concrete we danced on, some magic markers and spray paint. That's hip-hop.
That's hip-hop.
That's hip-hop.
Yeah.
We created that. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Even with all those flaws that we're talking about, I know that the joy that I get is that working class people who were forgotten created hip-hop.
Yep.
Lee Quinones, the great Puerto Rican graffiti artist, said to me, when people didn't want to come to our communities because they didn't want to see black and brown people, we put our names on subways in New York City, and they were forced to see our names as they went on subways all around the city. Think about how powerful that is, y'all. That's hip-hop. Hip-hop for me is the first time I heard Rapper's Delight, which is a cultural touchstone for so many of us. And, yo, I remember I was into disco, and that was Chic's Good Times. I was like, why are they talking over Chic's record? And it's not like rapping wasn't there before, because black girls doing double dutch in our communities, that's hip-hop, rapping. Muhammad Ali was hip-hop. Malcolm X was hip-hop. Y'all feel what I'm saying? If you're from the West Indies, dub poetry is hip-hop, y'all. Y'all know what I'm saying, right? I was excited when I started going to clubs. Man, I went to every club imaginable, including some of the ones that Brother Dan just mentioned. I see my brother Michael Datcher buy his children's book that's out here right now. Please. Michael, you remember back in 1992, I'm on the West Coast. Chris Cross had a song called Jump. And Michael, am I right? They kept playing the record, every other record, and we kept jumping every other record. That was joy.
Joy.
That was joy.
Yeah.
Joy was the first time I heard Tupac's Dear Mama. He's in jail. They gave us the first listen to it at the offices of Vibe magazine. I had never heard a song like that about a brother's love for his mother. I was also raised by a single mother. That was joy to me. Joy is being able to write about hip-hop to this very day. A year ago, I got to write about Kendrick Lamar's album. Shout out to Kendrick Lamar. Shout out to the West Coast. Because if you haven't heard Mr. Morale, I mean, think about it, y'all. Everything we're talking about, he talks about on that album. Did it sell as well as other albums? No. But Kendrick is going inside in a way we need men to go inside. Are y'all with me out there? You know, what is joy? 3 years ago, Black Lives Matter protests right here, Borough Hall, and all over Brooklyn, all over the country. Whose song was being played? Kendrick Lamar's We Gon' Be All Right.
Yeah.
That's joy to me.
Joy. Yes, sir. Exactly right. I don't know if there was any other questions, but I do want to just say a little something about joy. And one thing that is heartbreaking, and we can't solve it in this panel, but the gatekeepers, I think, were more interested in the money than the joy.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I mean, I got driven out of the industry. I'm somebody who heard an interlude and said, this should be a record. It became hip-hop's greatest love song. When you force people out of the industry that are there for the joy, you force women out of the industry that don't want to be defiled, it changes what comes out of the industry,
That's
right?
right.
And now we're getting the result of gatekeepers who cared about money and or who were toxic misogynists. The output of those shifts and choices is what we're feeling right now, and we got to fight for hip-hop to be about joy. I'm remembering being at Mecca one time when Put Your Hands Where Their Eyes Can See had just come out, and the DJ played that song 20 times in a row, and nobody was mad. Our food got cold. It was like, duh, duh, duh. And we didn't care.
Wow.
It was just joy.
Yes.
And so I guess I'm going to ask one more question, because I don't know if there's time for anyone to make... 5 minutes. If we have a question from the audience, if not, I'm going to just hit them with one more. Okay, I'm going to just go for it. What about the book that you just wrote and just shared with the world changed you in an unexpected way? I'm assuming that going into a book, it's like going into a tunnel. You have a thesis, you have an idea, you have a plan. But I'm guessing by the time you come out on the other side of that tunnel, you may be changed. You may be slightly different. And even in your case, Kevin, as you compiled work that was pre-existing, how did it change you to put it all together in one place? So that's the question. What changed you?
Wow.
What surprised you in writing this book?
Wow. I'm waiting for y'all.
I'll go first. I wanted to tell the story of hip hop, knowing that one book couldn't capture the story of hip hop. So it was almost like I set myself up to fail with that task. But I was really, really happy with what I was able to accomplish, and knowing, that I was able to get some of those pioneers and bricklayers and innovators on the record telling their story meant a lot to me. And that was the one thing that resonates through my head. It also, how it changed me, it made me not want to do a book for a little while, to be honest. If I'm keeping it 100.
Wow. Tell it.
Is that your first? That's not your first book, is it?
No, this is my third.
Third book. That's what I thought. Okay. I understand.
What about you, Dan?
Well, I when you work on a book, it is a tunnel, right? And you're just hoping, like Jonathan said, just to get to the end of it. Will I get that D'Angelo interview? Will Q-Tip finally talk to me? And then it's out, and then you have to worry about, okay, well, what will Detroiters think about this? Like the most important constituency.
Right.
And what happened with the book, a book like that, it's not easy to sell to a publisher. And I don't think that publishers and store chains and Amazon think it's going to do anything. What was really incredible about it is that it actually did quite well.
Yeah.
It is the first book about hip-hop to win a major literary award, and that was...
The Big Payback and Dilla. And the first thing I told him was, man, when you write about something, you really write about it.
He does.
He sure does. Okay, Kevin.
Again, I got to shout out the vision of Johnny Temple in Akashic Books, because Johnny actually hit me and said, Drew, would you like to collect your writings? And I was like, yikes. I had been thinking about it, but I didn't think anyone was going to do it. And I don't know if I'm the first writer in our generation to do it. I think I am. And it was not easy, because I thought, okay, just collect some stuff. I could do that in a month. It actually took me all of 2022 to find everything.
Wow.
Because I had to go all the way back to the 80s. I actually had the first thing I ever wrote in high school was actually in that book. And what I realized, too, a lot of stuff has not been digitized, even with major publications. So if you're writers out there, save everything, y'all. Save everything, digitize it, because it was a lot of work. I had to hire transcribers to type stuff over, all that kind of stuff. And to your question, it is profound to read your work when you were 18, 21, 25, 30, 40, etc. There's a lot of stuff that make it in there because, quite frankly, it sucks. Not everything we write is writers. Writers are lying if they say everything I write is dope. Absolutely not. We weeded out a lot of stuff, but also because I'm a human and civil rights activist and have been that as long as I've been a professional writer, I knew that I wanted to talk about race and gender and class and, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, the issues that matter to me, like how do we bring people together. So all of that's in there. And I had to look in the mirror a lot. Most writers, I realize, and maybe you guys are different, many of us don't go back and look at our work. And I think it's actually an important exercise to go back and review your work. Even Drew, as you're talking about your journey, I mean, Drew's, I don't know if y'all realize how dope Drew is. I mean, I think the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is the most important hip-hop centered album ever, period. Is the reason why that album is 25 years old this year. We need to celebrate that as well. But it's like, it's important to go back and acknowledge stuff. And I'm gonna get, on a real personal level, y'all, I'm just gonna say it. In hip-hop alone, we've lost a lot of black men who are only in their 40s and 50s. That's had a profound effect on me. DMX, Shock G, there's so many Coolio. And as a black man, between those brothers dying and watching what happened to George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, all these black males, I have definitely been feeling my mortality. So the reason why I did the Kevin Powell Reader, I agreed to it, my collected writings, I'm like, I hope that I live to 100. I just want to make it to 60 and 70. God willing, but just in case, let me get this book together so I can have a record that I actually was here. And I hate to say it like that, but I feel like that sometimes.
You were definitely here, Kevin. Thank you.
Long live.
This has been an honor. Thank you guys for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Drew.
Hip hop, you don't stop. Thank you. Don't forget, you can get the books over there, and they are all incredible.
We got to go sign books, right?
Sir.
Oh yeah, they're gonna sign them too.